Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle. Above me here on the screen is Joe Clark, and we're going to dive into three of the biggest Steelers-related topics of the week. Preseason Game 2 in the books. The third and final preseason game is rapidly approaching on a short week coming up on Thursday, and then there is a very long, too long in my opinion, break in between the final preseason game and the Steelers' first regular season game on September 7th. So it's going to be a bit of a dead period after this last preseason game, but we have plenty to talk about today. We're going to talk about preseason game 2 and the joint practice that took place before that with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We're going to talk about some 53-man roster predictions with that coming up next Tuesday, the roster cutdowns, and then wide receiver Gabe Davis coming in for a second visit. Maybe he's going to sign. We'll talk about that and more. Joe, before we dive in, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Pretty good. Can't complain. I think the training camp is done, and I'm finally catching up on sleep and rest and all that. Although it's still, pretty busy. I'm equal parts looking forward to and dreading the 17 days between the final preseason game and the first actual game. It will be
Yep.
nice to catch up on some rest, so I can't complain too much. But I think it's kind of that last little bit of anticipation where fans get a little restless there. So anyhow, we're going to dive into the first topic, which is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And first of all, the joint practice that took place last Thursday. And then we'll talk about the preseason game as well. The joint practice was closed, and so reporters could only talk about what players or coaches confirmed in interviews after practice. I think some Buccaneers media folk weren't used to those rules and kind of skirted the rules a little bit. Some of them were forced to, I would assume, were asked to delete some tweets from practice. But, once the cat's out of the bag, then you have reporters asking leading questions to, some of these players. And so a lot of the stuff kind of did surface. And it sounds like, at least from what I could gather, that the Steelers got beat up at that joint practice. Joe?
Yeah, it did not sound like it was a very good day for Jalen Ramsey. There's a few Bucks reporters that kind of put out there that Mike Evans had kind of had his way with Jalen Ramsey in coverage. Was kind of able to do whatever he wanted out there. And he had a big day. He didn't play in the game. Baker Mayfield played so well in the joint practice that he didn't play in the game on Saturday. It just didn't sound like it was a very positive day for the Steelers. And I mean, I feel like it's at least a little bit concerning given that was their first time playing their starters. Mike Tomlin said all who were healthy were playing against another opponent. And even though it wasn't a formal game, it didn't seem like the Steelers had it. Brendan Eccles said after that they just didn't have the energy and they came out, slacking a little bit. Their communication was poor. So all around, it just didn't sound like it was a very good day for the Steelers whatsoever.
Yeah, and you wonder, some of that, I guess Arthur Smith and Terrell Austin both spoke to the media. Was that just yesterday? I guess that was just yesterday. And we're kind of describing some of what took place last week with the Buccaneers. And, Arthur Smith pointing to the fact that it's the preseason and you're not really scheming anything. And so you're just kind of working on the fundamentals and more or less just practicing against yourself. It's trying to make yourself better against other opponents. And so I think there was an element that you can kind of point to for that. I think Emeka Egbuka, after the practice, said that the Steelers are playing a lot of zone. Of course, we know that they've been playing more man this year with Joey Porter Jr., Jalen Ramsey, Darius Slay, able to match up against anybody. It doesn't sound like they were doing that matchup man-to-man off defense as much against the Buccaneers. And so maybe they were just going into that practice trying to work on their zone. And so, maybe the Buccaneers having success was just a result of that. It remains to be seen, but of course, when Mike Tomlin puts out lofty statements like this is a potentially historic defense that he has, there's going to be some people getting upset anytime that they falter at all. So, yeah, I think the joint practice didn't sound like it went well. The offense, on the offensive side, I think the Steelers, 6-1 in 7 shots. So they did well in the 7 shots drill, but that's like a drill that the Steelers do every day. I don't think the Buccaneers probably do. So maybe a little bit of an advantage there in terms of the Steelers, just a home field advantage, if you will. And then they did the 2-minute drill, which every team in the league does, and it sounds like they basically were unable to do anything in that 2-minute drill. Anything from joint practice? Anything else that popped up, Joe? I mean, there was a couple other reports out there.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really besides. I think the big story was kind of the secondary because that's what everybody, all the beat reporters during training camp said Jalen Ramsey can, foundationally changes the defense with what he brings to the table. And it just didn't sound like the defense was all that hot. The offense, like you said, they did well in 7 shots. It sounded like they struggled later during the 2-minute drill. So not great there. They haven't, I mean, during training camp, the starting offense never really seemed to get in a rhythm with the 2-minute drill. So, something to note at least there. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway I think would be the struggles of seeming struggles of the secondary.
Punter Cameron Johnston apparently got into it with somebody on the Buccaneers. I think somebody was a little overzealous, almost landed on his plant leg, which of course he got a season-ending injury to that very thing last year in a game. And so I think he took exception to that in a practice setting and kind of ended up in a little bit of a scuffle with one of the Buccaneers players, at least the reports indicate. And I think Christian Kuntz might have even gotten involved in that. And Corliss Waitman was helping pull him off. So you figure there's going to be a fight or two in these joint practices. And you probably don't figure that that's going to be a punter fight. So a little interesting nugget there. But yeah, not a ton to come from the joint practice just because it was a closed session. More from the preseason game. But, Joe, it was kind of a sleepy preseason game. It wasn't the most exciting game top to bottom. You had other than Teddy Bridgewater kind of moving it up and down on the Steelers a couple times, there was not much offense to speak of. 17-14 was the final score, kind of a last-second field goal to end the game. And so the Steelers did lose. They're 1-1 in the preseason. Not that that matters a whole bunch. But, Joe, what's your top observation from that game?
Yeah, I mean, I think how Roman Wilson played is something to be a little excited about. I mean, he was wide open on the second reception, but he ran a nice crisp route, had 2 big receptions for the Steelers, and I think with some of the uncertainty with Calvin Austin III's injury, it's nice to see Roman Wilson step up. It seems as if he's kind of on an upward trajectory. I think Mike Tomlin said that same thing or I think it might have been last week before the joint practice. So I think that's definitely a positive. I mean, depending on what happens throughout, I mean, with Austin, and if the Steelers bring somebody else in, you could be looking at Roman Wilson starting the season as your wide receiver too, I think. So it's nice to see him kind of, staying and playing well. The Derrick Harmon sack, he did exactly what he should have done against, an undrafted free agent in front of him. So excited to see that. I mean, he looked pretty solid there. He had another nice long arm to stop a run play. So after so-so, I would say, opening performance, I think it was nice to see Harmon kind of get going a little bit. And then I mean, the other thing is just the Christian Kuntz injury. I mean, the dude Jerry Dulac reported this morning it was a fractured sternum, but he could be back week 1. I mean, I'm not a doctor. That seems like it would be pretty hard to recover from because when I was looking it up yesterday, everything seemed to indicate a 6 to 12 week recovery, but maybe it's not a full fracture, maybe just a chip or something. So good news that he could be back week 1. He hasn't missed a game since 2021 when he became Pittsburgh's starting long snapper. So it'd be kind of interesting to see how the odd operation works without him. I mean, Logan Lee did an all right job as the backup, but they signed Jake McQuaid, so I think he'll be the long snapper on Thursday. So I'm kind of interested to see how that operation goes throughout the game Thursday with a new long snapper just brought in this week, but obviously not really a big takeaway from last week's game.
Yeah, McQuaid's 37 years old. He's been around the block. He's played on several different teams. I mean, he played for the St. Louis Rams. That's how long he's been around. So, yeah, the Steelers have a viable alternative there, and of course, Logan Lee is kind of the emergency option should he make the roster, which I think he's trending in an okay direction for that. I think he's had a solid showing at camp, and the more you can do, the more valuable you are to the team. And so the long snapping thing, as goofy as it might be, they might need it a time or two down the road, and it's nice to have that in their back pocket. Yeah, I thought Roman Wilson was the big story, obviously, in this game. He had, how many yards did he finish with? 72 on 2 receptions. And so last week he had only the 2 receptions for, I think it was 24 yards. This week, 2 receptions for 72, which is 96. I think that leads the Steelers in yards through the preseason so far. And he had a long of 42. Last week he had that 19. And so he's starting to show that he can make plays. And I mean, I think he said after the game to one of the reporters that he has nothing to prove, which some people are going to take as, maybe a little bit arrogant for a player who's basically never stepped foot on an NFL field. But I kind of take it as a positive, to be honest, just because Aaron Rodgers, what did he say to Roman Wilson? You're in your head too much. You're overthinking things. You're trying too hard, kind of thing. You're seeking, my approval or whoever's approval too much. And so I think Roman Wilson obviously cares. Like, some people might take that as like, oh, I don't care. Like, I'm, just an arrogant statement. But to me, that's him trying to take that Aaron Rodgers message to heart and just kind of saying, all right, I just need to go out there and get 1% better every day, and it'll all take care of itself. And I think that's starting to show up on the field. He's turned things around since Rodgers said that to him, whether or not that was what did it or if that was just a coincidence. But pretty much since then, in the last several training camp practices, the last week of training camp, and then the first 2 preseason games, he's been, could he be a viable number 2 option? We're going to talk about Calvin Austin III here in just a little bit and his injury stuff. But right now, he kind of is the de facto number 2 until Calvin Austin returns to the fold or until the Steelers sign somebody else. So I think he's trending in that direction, and I guess we'll see. But nothing but positive on Roman Wilson lately. Mike Tomlin called it a big step forward for him. I think during the halftime interview that he did with Missy Matthews on the field during that second preseason game. So everything really trending in a positive direction there. Peyton Wilson and Brandon Echols each allowed a touchdown in that game, and Peyton Wilson notably said that he thinks he's the best coverage linebacker in the league, and so to let up a touchdown like that is going to draw some attention, but I think he was in good position. I think Brandon Echols was also in good position. Both of them were more or less where they needed to be in coverage, just didn't time their punch correctly or just kind of got unlucky. I think the Brandon Echols touchdown that he allowed to Emeka Egbuka was just really good placement. It was low. He couldn't have really known that the ball was going to be placed there. And so sometimes, the other team is paid to make plays, but I think both of those players have drawn plenty of praise, and there's really no reason to be down on either of them. Teddy Bridgewater just played a heck of a game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, both guys just kind of mistimed it. I mean, I can't argue with where they were. I think if Peyton Wilson timed it right, that's a deflection. Echols, again, good ball placement on that. I mean, I guess he could have gotten low and made a play on it, but if the throw was like an inch or two off, Echols is in position to make a play there. So I'm not really sweating it too much, but you would like to see, hopefully, if, that situation comes again, especially with a guy like Peyton Wilson, who you have high hopes for in coverage, he's able to kind of make that play. Doesn't, don't make the same mistake twice, sort of thing.
I just want to touch on Caleb Johnson real quick. The first week, he underwhelmed, 8 carries, 20 yards. The second week, 11 carries, 50 yards, an average of 4.5, which was better than last week by a good amount. A long of 14. He showed some nice burst on that one run where he kind of bent it back and picked up an explosive running play there. He also had 1 catch, I think for 9 yards. So what is that? A total of 59 yards. So a much better performance this time around. However, they didn't play him against the starters or with the starters, and I say that lightly because the Steelers were barely playing any starters, but he wasn't running behind the mostly starting offensive line. That went to Kenneth Gainwell, who didn't really get anything done. And so I don't know how to feel about the running game in general, just because last week it was a big struggle. This week, Kenneth Gainwell, when he was in there, did almost nothing. I think he had 2 carries, 2 yards. Not great there, obviously. And Caleb Johnson did all right, but it was against, guys who probably won't even be on an NFL roster for the most part, and running behind guys who may or may not be on an NFL roster. So, Joe, where are you at with this running game right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think from what we've seen and heard coming out of training camp is that it's been a disappointment. I think with Caleb Johnson, one thing he needs to work on is Sometimes it seems like he's trying to bounce it outside too much, which worked for him swimmingly in college, but guys in the NFL are a lot faster. There's not the speed discrepancy you had in college. So I think he's got to more focus on just finding the lane and just trucking towards a one cut and going through. But I mean, yeah, he had that nice 14-yard run. I think he would obviously look better behind the starting offensive line. Troy Fautanu after the game had a lot of praise for what he saw out of Caleb Johnson and what he's seen throughout camp. So, I mean, I'm not too concerned about him. And then you also got to factor in we haven't seen Jalen Warren in the preseason. So I'm hoping that when you get Jalen Warren back there, you get Caleb Johnson running behind the starters, that things are gonna look a little bit better. I mean, the only guy that's really stood out in the preseason has been Lou Nichols. He broke off like a 36-yard run, I think, in the fourth quarter, and then he had a strong opener against Jacksonville as well. So uh, interesting to know. Probably not a guy that's going to make the roster, but yeah, the ground game has been a little bit sketchy so far. So I'm hoping that that improves.
We talked about the Christian Kuntz injury. Nick Herbig also exited the game early with what was it, a hamstring, I think.
Yeah.
Did we get any updates on that situation?
No, Mike Tomlin didn't. I don't even think he brought it up at all in the post-game press conference. I think it was kind of the team was just being cautious with it. I don't think it's anything uh, to note. I mean, I don't know if we saw if he was practicing yesterday or not, but I don't think that's anything major that will keep him out for week one.
Now the Steelers did just sign a edge rusher from the UFL today. His name already escapes me.
Kenny Wilkes.
Kenny Willix, yes. And decent. I mean, he was a 7th-round pick to the Vikings and had some decent stat line stuff in the UFL. I think he had like 3 sacks and 28 pressures this past season. So decent stuff for him. But I think some people are going to read into like, oh my gosh, does that mean Herbig's injured? I don't think that's the case. I don't think this guy's going to make the roster. This is a guy that maybe has a chance to maybe push for a practice squad spot, or maybe somebody they're kind of trying out now in an extended tryout to maybe sign to their offseason roster next year. That could be the case. It's you don't want to write off any of these guys that join late in the process, because the Steelers have already said some good things about a guy like cornerback Daryl Porter, who joined them on, I think it was August 4th. After Friday Night Lights had already taken place and stuff, this guy joined the fold, and Terrell Austin yesterday was saying that he's a guy who could stick around. And this isn't a guy who's probably going to stick around on the 53, but this is a guy who could stick around on the practice squad. He's young. He could develop. You never know. So, keep an eye on Kenny Willix. We're going to move into some 53-man roster prediction stuff. In general, just off the top here, Rock Taylor, who was kind of a fan favorite at wide receiver, was released by the Steelers yesterday in kind of a flurry of moves. Kind of a surprise there to me, although, I mean, did he lead the team in receptions? I think he had 3 receptions for 39 yards in this most recent game. He also had a decent showing against in the first week there. Why am I already forgetting who they played the first week? This is how
Jacksonville.
Jacksonville, yes, thank you. He had a decent showing in both games, and this is a guy at the top of camp that I kind of pointed to and said, I bet you fans are going to fall in love with this guy. He's got the big body. He could go downfield. He was a deep ball specialist basically at Memphis. I thought, that he had a pretty good chance of becoming like a training camp darling to fans. I think he kind of achieved that to a certain extent. Maybe not to the extent I was thinking it might happen, but he is off the roster now. Apparently he was in Mike Tomlin's doghouse, according to Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's Jerry Dulac. Or was that Dulac or Fittipaldo?
Fittipaldo.
Ray Fittipaldo said that. So, I don't know what happened there, but just already starting to pare down that roster with cutdowns coming next Tuesday, and they have a very large surplus of receivers. That brings me to the receiver room in general. Joe, if you had to guess right now how many receivers which receivers the Steelers are going to take carry on to their 53-man roster, who would those be? And while I vamp here, they kept 5 last year on the initial 53.
Yeah, they kept 5 last year. They kept 6 the year before. But I'm going to operate right now under the assumption they'll keep 5. So I'd go with DK Metcalf, Calvin Austin III, Roman Wilson, Ben Skoranek, and Scotty Miller.
Okay, and so we're going to talk about a potential signing in a second, which could shake this up. if somebody were signed, like say a Gabe Davis, who would they bump off? Would it be Scotty?
See, I think if they do sign Gabe Davis, the odds of them taking six are higher. But then we also Ben Skowronek has a toe injury
Mm-hmm.
that Arthur Smith said yesterday. So, I mean, that's the biggest hindrance I think to his 53-man roster chances. But even then, he's such a good special teamer that if it's not something really serious, they could IR DTR him. I wouldn't be surprised if that was a route they went at the end of training camp during final roster cuts so they can get him to return. But yeah, the one big surprise to me is that just Robert Woods hasn't, solidified himself on the roster. I know last week Jared Dulek said he was 100% a lock, but he was playing at the very end of the preseason game on Saturday, and it seems like he's fallen behind a guy like Scotty Miller, who has seemingly impressed during training camp, built a little bit of a connection with Aaron Rodgers. So, I mean, I kind of had Robert Woods when we did our predictions. I had Robert Woods essentially as the wide receiver three. I think I had him as the third most receptions on the team. But right now, as it stands, I don't think he's going to end up making the roster because it seems like Miller's kind of surpassed him there. Um, so that to me right now is the biggest thing to watch in the receiver room is are they going to keep him because he's a veteran and he can be a little bit of a mentor and he helps out in the run game with his blocking ability, or are they going to go with a guy like Scotty Miller who offers them a lot more upside in the passing game? It feels like this year with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, not a good sign that he was playing that deep into the preseason. So I tend to agree. I am going to put together my final roster prediction here soon, and I think I'm going to leave Robert Woods off. But yeah, I mean, a lot depends on the health of Calvin Austin III, which we'll talk about in a bit. Like you said, Ben Skowronek's new injury, and whether or not they sign another guy. And so there's kind of a lot up in the air with this wide receiver room. Probably one of the more interesting groups to watch when it comes to cut downs, and maybe they end up carrying 6 or 7 and stashing some guys on IR if needed, but then that becomes a crunch at other positions, so it's difficult to really fit everybody. So yeah, we're gonna have to wait and see there. But some other position battles to look at: punter is one that is getting talked about a lot. Corliss Waitman and Cameron Johnston trading punt for punt pretty much, and Cameron Johnson punting deep into these preseason games as well. And so it actually does seem to be a battle. They each punted, I think, 3 times in this most recent game. Corliss Waitman for 174 yards, an average of 58. Cameron Johnson 127 yards for an average of 42.3. But that the raw average and numbers don't always tell the full story because, of course, Cameron Johnson was punting into short fields and was asked to pin it within the 20. He did pin 2 of those punts within the 20. But Corliss Waitman boomed a 64-yarder. Joe, do you think they're going to surprise everybody and stick with Waitman?
I personally do not, just because Johnson has been so good throughout his entire career. Like he was great last year when he first got here, in the training camp, a little bit in the preseason. Waitman was solid. I mean, don't get me wrong, and he has been really, really good. He's put up a great fight, but I just think you're going to go with the resume of Johnston and then kind of roll with what he can do, and then I mean maybe see if you can get something for Waitman, like a conditional seventh. I know they tried that with Brady Mann. It didn't work out, but they got something for Brad Wing years ago. So maybe there's a chance they can get something for him. I mean, I think there's maybe a 20 to 25% chance they keep Waitman, so I wouldn't completely rule it out, but I'm kind of a heavy lean towards them keeping Johnston right now.
Yeah, who's that ex-Steelers punter who was on the Coons podcast?
Josh Miller.
Josh Miller, yeah. He was talking about in these situations, it often comes down to, well, who's cheaper? And in this case, that would be Corliss Waitman. So, if it truly is a 50-50 push and they're like, wow, both of these guys are, basically neck and neck in this competition, maybe it comes down to, well, Waitman's cheaper and he's younger. You got to take that into account. He's 30. Cameron Johnson's 33. And Corliss Waitman's not coming off a major injury. And so there's some factors in favor of Waitman. You don't want to mess with the operation, which was rock solid last year. Boswell, one of the best seasons of any punter, certainly in Steelers history and probably in league history too. So I think I'm kind of leaning towards Waitman, though. I think Johnston does have a slight edge in terms of just raw punting ability, in terms of like the placement, the whole coffin corner punt kind of thing. I think he's better at placing those punts, which does matter. Maybe isn't as noticeable, especially when just looking at the stat line, the box score type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I give Waitman at least a solid chance. I'm not sure how I'll land there in my 53, but an interesting one there as well. Beanie Bishop Jr. is the last one I want to talk about here. I wrote about this coming into camp that, I don't think Beanie Bishop's spot is safe. And lo and behold, here we are at the end of camp, and Terrell Austin saying, yeah, he's really down to the wire. He's really got to push for that roster spot because they've got Jalen Ramsey. They've got Brandon Eccles, who's capable of playing in the slot. Beanie Bishop's more of a pure slot guy with a little bit of special teams ability. There's better special teamers out there that could beat him out for a spot, and there's better slot options with more versatility that can also play outside that could beat him out for a spot. And so Beanie Bishop, one of the big stories of the 2024 season as an undrafted free agent with 4 interceptions, might not make the roster.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting to see what the Steelers are going to do when it comes down to if you take Bishop as more of a pure slot, or do you take a guy that's going to be on the outside in Corey Trice Jr., who hasn't proven he can stay healthy at all. I mean, that was the knock on him coming out of college. In the NFL, he's suffered an injury all 3 seasons that he's been in the league. We don't know when he's going to come back. There hasn't really been anything. He's missed almost all of training camp with an injury, so we'll see if the Steelers, want to gamble on what Trice could be. He's a guy that it seems like they really like a lot. Or if you keep Bishop, because, he's proven at least he can stay on the field, and he gives the Steelers another slot option behind Jalen Ramsey right now. So it's good. That's definitely, I think, probably the one that fans are going to be watching the most is what happens, with Beanie Bishop towards the back of that cornerback room, who the Steelers keep in that secondary, because that's definitely a really interesting case.
Yeah, and you got Deshaun Elliott, who's capable of playing slot. You've got Chuck Clark, he's played basically an even split of slot, box, and free safety over the course of his career. And so that, again, lowers the value of somebody like a Beanie Bishop Jr. But working in his favor, Dante Kent has not been able to practice much this camp, hasn't been able to state a case for himself really. And then, like you said, Corey Trice Jr. may be on the outside looking in, but it really sounded like, Terrell Austin said, we know that Corey Trice Jr. can play in the NFL, so the talent's there. It's just a matter of him staying on the field. And so do they want to continue down that path of kind of saving him a spot and holding out hope that he at some point stays healthy? At this point, it's starting to get a bit ridiculous. It's becoming Senquez Golson type of status in terms of just never able to see the field. At least we've seen Trice in a couple of games, but yeah, not good for him. So as much as I was kind of against Bishop, not against Bishop, I have nothing against Bishop, but as much as I thought he might not make the roster at the beginning of camp, I think he probably will at this point just because of a lack of anyone really pushing him at the moment. And I guess they could keep 5 corners. And again, like if this receiver situation becomes difficult, I think they're more likely to be able to stash somebody like a Dante Kent on the practice squad than say a Scotty Miller. So it's just going to all depend on the injury situation at some of these other positions and who they need to carry on to the initial 53 so they can stash on IR. But if they do keep 6, I think Beanie Bishop is going to make it. We're going to move on to the third topic, which is Gabe Davis coming in for a visit. This is his second visit. He came in, I think it was June 4th for his first visit. At the time, the report was that he was still dealing with that injury, wasn't quite ready to sign. I think this visit, Jerry Dulac reported, is more of a medical recheck, and so we'll see. If you bring a guy in a second time, there has to be at least a strong interest of some variety. And so will he leave? We could be talking about, by the time a lot of you are watching this, it could be that Gabe Davis has signed with the team. Joe, where does Gabe Davis fit onto this roster? Who might he bump out of the room? And are you at least a little worried, like I am, that they're not going to be able to get him up to speed in time? I think back to Mike Williams last year, and they never got him up to speed.
Yeah, the Mike Williams comparison is kind of a good one because I think Gabe Davis is kind of bring a similar skill set that Mike Williams had. I think he's going to be a guy that, he's a lot faster, but he's going to be a guy they look to go deep down the field. Maybe, he can work underneath a little bit better, but I think really his role is going to be, he's going to try to be a deep threat. So who that bumps off the roster, I think Robert Woods, if they do sign Gabe Davis, probably isn't making the roster. And then if they only keep five receivers, then I think you would kind of bump Scotty Miller off the roster because maybe the two of them would be a little bit too redundant, and Gabe Davis has more production, more experience. But I'm certainly worried they wouldn't be able to get him up to speed in time. I mean, it was a few weeks ago, it was at the very onset of training camp when Gabe Davis went on the Kay Adams show and talked about his knee injury and said, he's still not 100% there. He's still working his way back. I mean, that was 3, 4 weeks ago. So even if he's better now, I mean, and he has been working out, he's been posting videos of him working out. But I think Dulac also reported the Steelers didn't like his medicals last time he came in. So who knows how much better it's gotten when he fully admitted, 3, 4 weeks ago that he's not there yet. Because I think the initial report was that he was hoping to sign by training camp, and now training camp ended a week ago, and he's now just coming back in for a medical recheck. So we'll see. I mean, I thought yesterday when it was reported that he was coming in, I thought the chances of him signing were a little bit higher. And now with the Dulac that it's a recheck, and he's also going to Buffalo tomorrow. And he did talk about how much fun it would be to go play with Josh Allen again and go to the Bills. So it'll be interesting to see if the Steelers kind of push to get him to sign today and not let him go to Buffalo, because if he does, it's a place he's very familiar with, and it seems like he would want to play there. So yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued to see what happens with him because I think he could be a solid piece. I mean, of who's out there at receiver right now. I mean, he's still fairly young. He's got some decent production. And I think him and Aaron Rodgers could probably be a good fit, but I just don't know where he's at health wise. And you have Calvin Austin, who's you don't know where he's going to be health wise come week one. It seems a little bit of a question, at least, that if he's going to be ready. And I don't think you're going to get Gabe Davis, ready to play week one here in just 19 days. So you could be thin at receiver if you do bring him in and he pushes somebody else off the roster.
Yeah, and the Bills just signed Grant DuBose, so will that change whether or not they have a spot for somebody like Davis? I don't really know. I don't know enough about the Bills roster right now to make a call on that, but I think if you're going to bring this guy in, you bring him in now. I mean, I guess if you have a strong inkling that the Bills aren't going to sign him, then you wait until after the roster cut down so you don't have to do gymnastics to fit him in if you're going to have to put him on IR for the first 4 weeks or whatever. Maybe you could figure this out after kind of the cut down period if it comes to that. But I do struggle to see his fit in this offense in general. He had a really rough year last year with the Jaguars. They paid him a ton of money and he just disappointed greatly. So I don't know. I mean, a lot of people are looking at him as a potential like number 2 option. I don't really view him that way. I think, I would prefer if Calvin Austin is healthy that it be him, and Roman Wilson seems to be stepping up into at least that conversation. I'd prefer to kind of give him the nod. But I think at the very least he would provide another viable deep threat for them, which isn't a bad thing to have in your back pocket there. Calvin Austin III, speaking of him, he was in a helmet yesterday at practice, the first time since August 1st. A lot of mystery around his injury, not a ton of reporting in terms of what that injury is, though we've seen him. He didn't have a brace on his legs or arms or, no visible brace of any kind. And so what does that lead you to believe? Well, probably something core related or, something like that's not going to have an obvious brace involved. And he's now been out for almost 3 weeks, but he has the helmet back on. He's working. He talked to the media. He said, basically said it's been frustrating, but he deferred to the training staff for his week 1 availability. Sounds like that's in question, but he didn't say that directly. But just by the way he answered that question, it did sound up in the air whether or not he would play. It didn't sound to me like it would be something that lasts, where they'd need to put him on IR. Is that the same read you got?
Yeah, I thought from what he said, he might miss week 1. It doesn't sound like he would miss, anything more than 2 games. If it was an IR stint, I would be very surprised based off how he answered that question.
Yeah. So to me, when I first heard the Gabe Davis news, I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Calvin Austin III still hasn't practiced. We haven't heard a lot about it. Maybe this is going to end up being a 6 to 8 week kind of 6 to 8 games missed kind of situation. Now that he's back in a helmet and he's kind of talked to the media, I'm beginning to wonder exactly what would be the purpose of signing a Gabe Davis. So, yeah, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see there. I don't have a ton more to add to that subject now. We're going to move into a question from David O., one of our contributors on the site, calling in. We'd love to hear that. This is, if you want to have your question answered on a future episode, 412-254-3145. You can call and leave a voicemail, or you can text the line. Just tell us your name and where you are from. The question from David O.
Ross and Joe, this is David O. I'm just really going to be interested in what your reaction is to the offensive line with their performances this Saturday. I'm heading to the game, and that's something I'm going to be keeping an eye on. Anyway, I'm just really, really interested in how you feel that the line performed as a unit. Take care, guys.
All right, David O. asking about the offensive line and their performance. We'll talk about their performance in general over the course of the first two preseason games. He asked that question ahead of preseason game 2. It sounds like you were there, David O., so I hope you had a good time at the game. Joe, you can go ahead and start there.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the starters, Troy Fautanu has been solid. Brother Jones has been a little bit up and down, but I think, I'm generally pretty happy with his performance. He had a decent game against the Jaguars, against their starters, and then he had a good block on a touchdown pass against the Buccaneers. But I think generally it's been a little bit sloppy. Zach Frazier's snaps haven't been great. They've been a little bit low. And then largely it's by and large been the backup offense line, but a lot of penalties. Gareth Warren had 2, I think, against the Buccaneers. Stephen Jones had 1. Just plethora across the board. Kind of sloppy. The operation hasn't been very sound. So hopefully the Steelers don't have to use too many of their backup offensive linemen this year. Their depth there is pretty thin. But as for the starters, I mean, I think it's been pretty solid. I haven't been, too upset with anything, but I think Frazier's snaps are the biggest thing to kind of watch for there right now.
Yeah, I thought the tackles both looked good in the first game. I think we talked about this last week. I did a film room, and they looked good. I think Broderick Jones in particular took a small step back in the second game, in my view. It just wasn't a lot more of those issues that were popping. Some of those issues popped up in the first preseason game too, but a lot more of those 2024 issues with landing his punches and timing his punches and kind of marrying his feet to his hands and stuff like that were showing up a little bit more, albeit it was only 10 snaps. He didn't have a time to get up to speed, and he was playing against a pretty good defensive front there that Tampa Bay has. So you don't fault him too much, and I'm not hitting the panic button or anything. I thought Broderick was a little bit worse. Zach Frazier, has to get that stuff figured out. And in general, the run blocking, you thought that was going to maybe, if anything, be the strength, and the pass blocking might be rough. Turns out it's looking maybe like the opposite might be true, which probably good news for Aaron Rodgers and maybe good news for the Steelers in general, but you would like to see that run blocking come alive at some point. Arthur Smith pointed to the lack of scheming, and so maybe, they're just working on some stuff, but you also don't want to give them too many excuses when this offensive line, we kind of knew it was going to be a work in progress, probably going to be one of those things where, week 7 or 8 is when they maybe start to click in the run game and stuff. So it might be a rough start to the season in terms of running the football. Hopefully they can survive that, because the start of the season is important, because all the hard games are coming at the end. They really need to stack some wins at the beginning of the season to set themselves up well. And I worry that the offensive line is not going to be in great shape at the beginning of the season to do that. So that's the one big worry. But I hope that answered your question, David O. Again, if you want your question answered on a future episode, 412-254-3145. That's also in the show notes if I'm talking too fast. I think that's all for today's show. I am Ross. That is Joe. And we will catch you guys next time.